Hello again, it's Professor McCartan on another topic, short-term memory and retrieval cues. So let's jump right into it. So how about this? Close your eyes. I'm going to say 8 words out loud. When I say them, I want you to try to remember as many as you can. Ready? Okay, close your eyes. Here we go. Brush, star, horse, table, lemon, bottle, ship, book. Now pause the lesson. Try to remember those words. And when you're ready, push play again. How many words do you remember? Which ones do you remember? Is there a list again? Let's go. Let's do that list again. Brush, star, horse, table, lemon, bottle, ship, and book. If you tried to follow along in the exercise, you were using your short-term memory to complete this task. In another lesson, you can learn about the difference of short-term and long-term memory, but we're going to specifically sit on short-term memory and retrieval cues today. Short-term memory and long-term memory is what we're really looking at focusing on, because in consumer behavior and in the marketing world, we have to have an understanding of how individuals remember things, right? So, continuing on, when we look at short-term memory, theoretically, short-term memory could work in a variety of ways. But for most people, it seems to be tied to the sense of hearing, or other words, it's an auditory process. Why does research seem to think that short-term memory is auditory? We have 2 pieces of evidence for this conclusion. The first piece of evidence comes from the way that people say about what they do when they're trying to remember something. If you tried to remember the list of words from the beginning of this lesson, what was your strategy did you use? Most people will say that the tasks like this one, they might repeat the words silently to themselves over and over again. So if you're trying to remember the word brush, you'd close your eyes and say brush, 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 brush to yourself in your head as many times as possible. The fact that you're mentally saying the word means that you are using sense of hearing. When you compare this to other options you had, you only have tried maybe visual, like maybe what a brush looks like, or you could try to imagine holding a brush in your hand and what it feels like, or even what a brush smells like or tastes like. Well, not that you would be tasting a brush. We have all 5 senses available to us to task this and to work on this, but most people choose the mental repetition for things such as words. This means our basic orientation for short-term memory is auditory. Correct. People report using the strategy even with the words they're supposed to remember present, even if it's presented visually, for instance on a computer screen. So the first piece of evidence that short-term memory is auditory is out there. The second piece of evidence is, imagine you were asked to remember a list of letters. Instead of words, maybe letter C. Now you asked to identify the letter using a multiple choice test. For the letter C, you were given maybe 3 choices: C, P, or O. If you couldn't remember, you may have the wrong answer or the wrong choice. Do you think you would more likely choose O because it looks like a C? Chances are you would not. Instead, you would choose P because P, like C, rhyme. P and C rhyme. Yes, that's correct. So again, even if the letters were presented visually, it seems that people from memory base the letters on the sound. So when we look at this evidence, we can conclude the fact that short-term memory is very much auditory in our systems. Why does this matter? Well, we're going to discuss some strategies on improving your memory, as well as talk about the strategies used in information to help you remember things later. So let's talk about storage capacity of short-term memory. Researchers have a lot of questions that come up with that magic number of 7 plus or minus 2 as the number of pieces of information individuals are capable of being able to use in their short-term memory at any given time. What does 7 plus or minus 2 mean? Another way to say it would be that you can keep between 5 and 9 pieces of information in your head at once. So it ranges from 5, which is 7 minus 2, up to 9, which is the 7 plus 2. Asking you to remember 8 words at the beginning of this lesson should have been possible, but right on the edge of what you can easily remember using your short-term memory. Haha, I know I got you there. So we do look at that factor when we are creating marketing and creating materials because we have to understand that individuals only have so many different cues. Now, let's talk about the serial position curve. The last idea that I want to talk about in the short term is the serial position curve. In order to understand this concept, again, think about the list of those words that I gave you at the beginning of the lesson that I asked you to remember. Do you remember them? Which particular word did you remember? Most people, well, better luck remembering something towards the end of the list. The word in the middle, though, are the most likely to be forgotten. This tendency is called serial position curve, and that's what the serial position curve is all about. If you wanted to graph how likely it is that each word on the list would be remembered, you would do this pretty easily. The y-axis could be the percentage or proportion of the words that are recommended, anywhere from 0 to 100%. The x-axis would be an order of where it has appeared on the list, from the first word to the last word. So the term for where the item occurred on the list is called the serial position of the word. Now, if we were to put a dot on the graph, or represent how likely that each word in the list was remembered, we'd end up with a graph that looks similar to maybe this one, except my example is of 20 words. I try not to give 20 to students and try to stay with that lower number there to keep in the 7 plus or minus 2 thought process. Now, also looking at the list, there is something that is called a primacy, and a primacy is the tendency for items at the beginning of the list to be remembered, and that's why you'll see it at such a high aspect. And on the opposite end, there's recency, which recency is the tendency for items at the end of the list to be remembered. So why do we remember words at the end? This is called recency. Now, when we look at that, think about a commercial. A commercial is dynamic in the beginning. Typically, you don't remember a lot of what's going on in the middle, and then they're showing you the product at the end. And that's because of the primacy and recency part of the memory, of the short-term memory. Now let's move on to looking at retrieval and looking at the long-term memory aspect of our memory. So let me give you an example. Imagine you're at a grocery store and you run into an acquaintance. They might give you a handshake or give you a hug, maybe proceed to tell you all about their day or their weekend or something that's going on with inside an organization or something to that effect. Although you realize you know this person, you can't remember their name, or you don't know where you know them from. Not wanting to seem rude, you just let the person continue the conversation. You look around hoping you'll get some kind of clues to identify that person. You look in the cart to see anything that might trigger, and it's nothing's going on. They're still talking. And then you look in their cart and you notice, let's say, juice boxes. And then the image of your head pops up to your child drinking one of those juice boxes at the last basketball game. And so you remember this person that you're talking to's name is blank, and her child or his child plays with your child on their team. This is the site of that juice is what helped that retrieval cue. So that's that retrieval aspect of that long-term memory. So when we're calling memory of maybe, let's say, your child's drink is an example of retrieval, before this point, the memory had to be stored in that long-term memory. And we're not conscientiously aware of it typically. Retrieval is the process of accessing information stored in that long-term memory. Through retrieval, we are tracking and taking out memories from that storage, and then we turn around and are consciously aware of them. So what are retrieval cues? Because we do have to have some kind of cue to pull up that memory. So before this point, the memory has been stored in that long-term memory and you were not consciously aware of it, right? So that retrieval cue is that stimuli that assist the memory in retrieval. In other words, retrieval cues help you access memories stored in those long-term memory and bring them to your conscious awareness. The presence of retrieval cues can make recalling memories much easier. Retrieval cues can be external, such as maybe the smell of a candle that might remind you of your grandmother's apple pie. That would be a retrieval cue. It can also be internal, such as maybe a feeling of sadness that reminded you when you maybe had a broken relationship with somebody or something to that effect. So we have to look at that aspect and understand that pulling from the long-term memory happens quite oftenly, and that is, as marketers, our goal when we are creating advertisements and creating messages, to pull out from that mode. So we have the retrieval, and we look at retrieval cues, but there's also encoded and or converted into something in that aspect. So when I look at encoded, we look at the factor of when we have that memory stored in the long-term memory, we're also present in the memory to retrieve that long-term memory. So let's say if you or your spouse had your first dance to a slow song, Take My Breath Away by Berlin. Good song, guys. You are more likely to recall the details of that first dance when you hear that song again. In this case, the song Take My Breath Away serves as that retrieval cue. So the song is also present during and retrieval of the memory and when the memory was initially encoded. So that's the information that helps you bring that out. Now, have you ever had, I just want to throw that out to you, have you ever had retrieval failure where you've had that tip of the tongue phenomenon where you're like, I can't retrieve what it was? So I can tell you that that is very real. You can have tip of the tongue phenomenon. It's not in your text, it's not in the requirement to understanding consumer behavior, but I always like to throw it out there because I don't know about you, I do have tip of the tongue phenomenon every once in a while, even making this video sometimes. So until next time, this is Professor McCartan on short-term memory and retrieval cues. Take care.